Evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's lovely to see you all, and we're very appreciative of the fact you've all joined us this evening on such a, baking hot day. But of course, the issue of Yemen, the challenges that it faces are of immense importance, and it's something we at Caabu are very passionate about, that there hasn't been enough attention on Yemen. We can't force that, but we do try to ensure that it does get some airing. And of course, as you know, we've seen the way in which Yemen has been, dragged into the war between Iran, Israel, and the United States. We've seen firing of rockets and missiles. We've seen threats to close the Bab el-Mandab, but all at the same time that Yemenis themselves face a humanitarian crisis, energy crisis, particularly in the south. We've had flooding earlier on in the year, and a host of other challenges. So it's really my great pleasure to welcome our speaker tonight, Baraa Shiban. He's a researcher, political analyst on Yemen and the Gulf, and he's a consultant with the human rights group Reprieve. He really is, and you've seen his biography, he is a real expert on all the trends and events in Yemen, and I think a very useful guide for us tonight about this wonderful country and the challenges it now faces. So, Baraa, thank you once again for joining us at Caabu, and you're going to speak for a quarter an hour, 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. If people wish to put their questions in the chat, that would be great. But a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Chris. It is such a pleasure to be with you at Caabu. I remember I spoke at Caabu the first time when I moved to Yemen, literally at the beginning of the conflict. And believe it or not, it's now 10 years, and we're still, and kind of the same conflict is still, it's still not over. When I was thinking about what could be discussed about Yemen, Yemen is a very, very complex country. It has a magnificent story to tell. It has such a great potential. But unfortunately, the many different crises that Yemen has been going through hasn't allowed really the Yemeni people to share with literally with the entire world what it is known for. I would have rather hoped that today we would be speaking about its potential in tourism, in history, in coffee, in honey, in culture, art. There are many things that Yemenis, when we talk amongst ourselves, we talk about, but unfortunately that's not the picture outside Yemen, and that's because of the multiple crises really that Yemen is facing. And if you want to go in, I'll try to focus the discussion on Yemen has a governance issue, political issue, but also living through regional tension, a combination of three factors that hasn't allowed any smooth transition to happen. Yemen, coming to be known as a republic in the 1960s, should have the idea, the principle of a republic, that the public basically votes in the leader. Yemen have seen some progress following the 1990 when political parties were announced, but I will try to focus on what happened in the last 10 years, and specifically the last couple of years. The main challenge that Yemen cannot go through a smooth transition is that the political life, the normal political arena, isn't active, as vibrant as it was, at least to the level it was in 2011 when the Arab Spring happened. So when the Arab Spring happened, with all of the troubles that were before, the concept, the idea of having elections were there. The idea of Yemen should have a parliamentary elections, that idea is there. The discussion were amongst political parties, that the parties need to negotiate the electoral system, the form of governance, is it a centralized, a decentralized, and reforms on the voter registry. There's certain things that political parties usually at a national level that they were able to they're able to discuss. Since the Houthis, I'll start with the Houthis. Since the Houthis took over the capital first in 2014, they've banned political parties from operating, and with that came also banning the media from operating, banning civil society from organizing and meeting and carrying out their activities as civil society. This basically led Yemen into a political political deadlock we first witnessed in 2015, leading to the initial conflict. Which basically led to a civil war, starting as a civil war, then becoming regional. Now, amongst that, Yemen had always had a real issue with a real governance issue. From one government to another, you don't have the concept of normal accountability. And now I want to add that to the concept of the conflict. So when the fighting started in the south of Yemen between the Houthis and the Yemeni government, and then the Yemeni government were able to push them out in 2015 from at least from the southern territories. There hasn't been a normal form of governance operating in South Yemen. The parliament hasn't been operating, so lack of accountability. There isn't a form of a political structure that is holding the government to an account. And adding to that, regional tension. And I would start on this on multiple levels. The first, you'd have the obvious tension that happened between Gulf states, or primarily between Saudi Arabia, but you could add to that a couple of Gulf countries, and Iran. The ramifications of what happened in other arenas started to reflect itself on Yemen. What was happening in Syria was then affecting Yemen. Iran feeling it's being challenged, then becoming more emboldened to start sending more weaponry, sending more advisors, trying to make it basically harder for the Gulf states at the southern border. But within the coalition that came in to support the Yemeni government, there was a real tension happening within the coalition itself, because the coalition consisted mainly of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Both of those sides were funding and operating on the ground different groups. So there hasn't been a unification or a unity of vision in terms who should govern Yemen, at least the territories or the areas that are controlled by the Yemeni government, which led to a protracted form of conflict. So you have a main conflict happening between the Yemeni government and the Houthis from one side that continued. It would go up and down. It would get very tense at times, but it can cool down at times. But at the same time, there's tensions happening in the areas that are on paper normally should be under the control of the Yemeni government. So the United Arab Emirates decided to fund a new group known as the Southern Transitional Council, mainly secessionists who are calling for the secession of South Yemen, with their grievances going way before even the Arab Spring. We can tap into that later, or if someone has more questions in the Q&A. But nevertheless, you have funding, arming, and weaponry going to a faction that is calling for the secession of South Yemen, and the Saudis operating and funding and working through the Yemeni government. That led to multiple forms of conflict happening and I would go very quickly so people can realize. While the main conflict is happening with the Houthis, who are still in control of the capital even as we speak, there was a conflict between the UAE funded groups and the Saudi funded groups in 2017, in 2018, in 2019, and then again in 2022. And then finally in 2025, 5 rounds of conflict happening between factions that are supposed to be on the paper, operating on the same page. But another reality is being formed in South Yemen, is that the kind of the normal known political parties that could not operate no longer in the Houthi controlled areas were also unable to operate in the southern territories, in the interim capital, for example, in Aden. All political parties, all of them, have the offices shut. The civil society cannot mobilize, cannot organize. We, as people who are working with people on the ground, constantly will have to find ways to either get people outside of Yemen so we can meet, and then they get back, and at the same time, the political parties rely on kind of the existence of their informal network, trying to work through the structure that existed before this whole conflict started. In general, if we try to find how can Yemen move forward from this multi-layered form of conflict, there should be a general consensus within the region, but also at the international level, that Yemen have a culture of pluralism and political parties, and that should be revived with all of their troubles, with all of their challenges and problems, but without operating of normal political parties who are functioning, who are operating. The Yemenis cannot go through a normal transition. A discussion of having, for example, elections or early elections, or organizing a political solution cannot happen if the political parties are unable to operate inside the country. The second is there should be the opening the space for the civil society. Civil society always are able to. We had a period of civil society always holding the government to account, putting pressure, campaigning, mobilizing, and organizing. That cannot happen in the current climate. Finally, there needs to be a consensus on a regional level, and this is one way I would say the international players, countries like the UK and the United States and European allies, can work through with the Gulf states on having a unity of vision of what needs to happen in Yemen, how both the region but also with Yemenis envision the future of Yemen. One of the main challenges that happened through the last decade is that you had the United Arab Emirates, for example, funding a whole security apparatus that is operating its own system. It had its own form of governance, its own even prison system, away from the formal structure. As a result, the official institutions started to weaken. Then their ability to deliver services are usually being challenged. We are speaking right now in summer, and people are complaining about the heat today in London. People in Aden went out to the streets so they can sleep. Literally, they went out to sleep in the streets because the government, for example, is unable to provide electricity, AC, in the summer. And if you've been to South Yemen, you know how hot that can be. And the second thing is the crucial importance of smooth transition to happen within the normal framework of political parties. We need to understand how I'm always with all of its trouble, I always call for a traditional mindset of how politics should be handled. Non-state actors should always you can address their grievances. You can work with the official governing bodies on the local grievances, but it should be within a normal structure of the Yemeni state. The non-state actors challenging the role of the state will always lead to multiple rounds of conflict. Now, with all of the trouble that happened, and I'm focusing on the tensions that happened between the UAE-funded groups, the Emirati-funded groups, and the Saudi-funded groups, there is a small opportunity that arose in December and in January, when finally Saudi Arabia decided there needs to be all security forces and military forces need to be merged within the official apparatus of the Yemeni government. While that is happening, we need to ensure also then the normal life of political parties need to be restored to the southern cities. We need to see normal political parties able to call for their annual conferences, to call for their even elections, to have their meetings inside Yemen, not outside Yemen. You can only reach a form of political settlement if political parties are operating normally within the existing framework, and encouraging, if there are groups who are still operating as non-state actors, to reform themselves as political parties. We are living right now, literally, as we have our Prime Minister here in the UK is resigning, and there's a new cabinet reshuffle. That can only happen because political parties are normally meeting. You go to the House of Commons and they are still meeting. Without that, there will be conflict. The deadlock that happened in 2014 when the Houthis took over the capital, the main problem they caused is that they blocked even parliament from meeting, and that basically didn't allow for the political transition to take its place within a normal structure. Now, when the Yemeni government was kind of normally restored into South Yemen, the return of the political structure should have been encouraged, not allowing for militants, militias, non-state actors to start basically suppressing dissent, civil society, and political parties from operating. I will pause now, but there will be if someone wants more details, I'm more than happy to go into any questions you would have in the Q&A.
Well, thank you very much, and you've stuck very much to time, but that's absolutely fantastic. So just to remind everybody to put questions in the chat if they can, if you've got them. I just thought I'd abuse my chair's privilege by kicking off. So we've obviously seen the whole issue of Yemen arising as a result of the US-Israeli war on Iran. And of course, this changes the calculations of certain Gulf states. And you've talked about Saudi and the Emirates. In what way do you think all of this might impact their approach to Yemen going forward, given obviously that they've had a hit to their economy, their whole security bubble has been shaken up? Will they see Yemen as something that needs to be sort of dealt with because, there was that threat, of course, made to close down the Bab al-Mandab? Or will they be focusing more on their own narrow immediate security interests, looking at Iran in particular, I mean, how will it impact, how these countries deal with Yemen going forward?
So the way I understand how the mindset happening, I'll start in Saudi, but then it does have some similarity to the Gulf state. But Saudi is the most concerned, I would say, with what's happening in Yemen, simply because of its large border. It's big Yemeni. There is the biggest Yemeni diaspora are living in Saudi Arabia. So basically, any serious instability will immediately damage the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In 2022, Saudi Arabia adopted the measure of let's reconcile. Let's try and see how we can get the Houthis. So they basically pressured all the political factions in Yemen, despite all of the differences, to merge within one entity called the Presidential Council. And their idea was then they would encourage the Houthis through incentives, even financial incentives and anything, to merge within that entity, and then try to formulate a solution based on that. Multiple challenges happened. October 7th came, and the conflict in Yemen is no longer just a local conflict. So that basically put a new challenge on the Saudis. Now with the current war in Iran, yes, there's still that thinking of, can we move forward, but there is still that main concern. The Houthis can really damage the global trade. They can, we've seen what they've done in the Red Sea, and that's still very much a concern. So they've ramped up support to the forces on the ground, basically the Yemeni government forces. Those are the same forces that then they used when they deployed them when the tensions happened with the Southern Transitional Council in December of 2025, and basically managed to push basically, or to quell down the Southern Transitional Council's attempts to expand their control. But the mindset is that they have that forces in case they need them. But at the same time, they trying as much as possible not to be dragged in a conflict where it's spearheaded by Israel. That's a very real concern happening, at least from what I understood, within the political mindset in Saudi Arabia.
Thank you very much. Now we have a question from Roya Arab. Roya, do you want to ask your question?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chris. And thank you, Baraa, for your very informative and quick overview. You said a lot in a short time. I wanted to please ask, to what degree does Yemen and regional instability trace its roots to the US-led dual containment policy in the early 90s? That's number one. And the competition between Saudi Arabia and UAE has created some really unexpected alliances. The Gulf Arabs signing Abraham Accord with entities that carried out a genocide. Now, how do these externally driven interests impact Yemen's security and its building up of a coalition government?
Well, thank you, Roya. So the first thing is about the United States. One of the I would say constant policy of U.S. relations with Yemen is that it had always outsourced its Yemen file to Saudi Arabia. Its understanding of Yemen only goes through the concern of Saudi Arabia, and how I've never seen at any time a U.S. policymaker thinking of Yemen as Yemen on its own. People have many thoughts about this, but that's just the reality. There is a concern for Yemen about Al-Qaeda, mainly terrorism, and then second, how does instability in Yemen affect the Gulf states? Now, similarly, when the tensions were at its peak between Iran and Saudi Arabia, that reflected itself very clearly inside Yemen. There is now, as you said, rightfully said, there is a kind of a new form of regional tension happening between Saudi Arabia from one side, but you could put Saudi, Egypt, to a certain degree, Turkey on one side, but very clearly UAE, Israel, and countries who favor the Abraham Accords. The main concern that happens is that these tensions are starting to affect other countries like Sudan, and it can damage Yemen. If we were speaking, Roya, in December 2025, just maybe 6 months ago, I would have told you there is a major conflict that's going to arise between Saudi Arabia and the UAE in South Yemen. The Saudis have decided to step up its presence in South Yemen, and basically people request or call out the call for the UAE to withdraw its presence inside Yemen. In my opinion, that should have been done very early, at least 5 years ago, because the UAE clearly didn't share the same vision it had for Yemen with Saudi Arabia. And for more regional tension is just going to be more damaging for Yemen and for the stability of Yemen.
Thank you for that. And we got a very pertinent question from Hassan Abdul Razak. Hassan, would you like to ask yours?
Hello, hi. Thank you very much for this talk. It's really very informative. My question is, what is your assessment of Britain's policy towards Yemen vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia? Particularly if you could talk about Britain's supply of weapons and military know-how to Saudi and how that has influenced its outlook towards Yemen.
The UK had an initial idea of how a political transition would happen if you go back to 2014, 2015. But its interest on Yemen started to fade away as the UK, itself looking more inward looking. Brexit happening, multiple issues happening, so becoming less interested in Yemen. Even you could see that on the amount of support and aid it was providing compared to what it's doing today. The initial idea was that basically, they would pressure the Houthis and that's in the sense that you were mentioning. They have contractual agreements with countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE in terms of providing weapons, until they can pressure the Houthis to come to the table. The whole calculation, in my opinion, has changed after October 7th. The Houthis became more reckless, and Yemen looked like a country that can get dragged into a regional conflict with Israel and the United States if Iran is under immense pressure. Now, the faster that Trump reached a deal with Iran, it will be the better for countries like Yemen. If that didn't happen, if the conflict with Iran took, I think, a little bit longer, Yemen would have been involved, especially the Houthis. I mean, specifically the Houthis would have been involved in that conflict.
Can I just ask the obvious follow-up to Hassan's question? What do you make of the Trump administration's approach towards Yemen, such as we can tell it?
Trump started, as everyone can remember, it started his tenure with an immense and pressure campaign, so the Houthis have been designated as a terrorist organization, and that will make it hard for regional countries, but namely Saudi Arabia, to formulate a clear political understanding, because it's always going to be challenging to providing financial incentives to an entity that is proscribed. But also, it started with a military campaign. We remember a very intense air campaign that they led against the Houthis, and it stopped only because the Omanis intervened. The Trump in general, I think, I mean, he had some idea about what he could achieve in Yemen, which is basically bomb them until they announce surrender. But as we've all witnessed, his interest span is very limited. So very quickly he started moving and losing interest and finding interest in other areas. The risk is, of course, if Israel started a new campaign in Yemen, that could drag Trump back into another round of aerial campaign against the Houthis. Right now, it doesn't look like he's interested, but I'm not seeing that the approach of the United States vis-a-vis the Houthis is going to change anytime soon. I think more importantly now is to get a formula with the Trump administration to encourage them to work with countries specifically like Saudi Arabia, and not with multiple countries. The more you have more regional players intervening in Yemen, the harder it's going to be for Yemen, for Yemen and for Yemenis to get a political resolution.
Thank you very much for that. Now we've got a question from Stephen Booth. Stephen. Well, if he's not there, it's a very good question, because essentially he's asking for a little primer on who are the Houthis. So perhaps you could give us your sort of 60-second take on who they are and what is different about them.
So, in short, the Houthis are a theological movement. They started as a small insurgency in the early 2000s against the government of former President Ali Abdullah Saleh, so against the central government. But as years were moving, they were growing in number and growing in the capabilities. A lot of debate about their links with Iran. I think right now there's almost no debate that they've been funded and trained and supported by Iran, at least that in following the civil war. Iran had developed its interest with the Houthis, especially after the Arab Spring, sending shipments of weapons. But again, and this is another example, as the Gulf countries were getting more involved in countries like Syria, like Iraq, and other places, Iran thought it was a good investment to invest with the Houthis, because they can always put pressure on Saudi Arabia. Now, the Houthis on themselves, I'll put it in short. What do they share with the Iranians? I mean, they share that they both don't see the Saudi royal family as worthy of being custodians of the holy mosques. So that's kind of that long-term vision that they share. There are then differences between them and the Iranians, but on this common goal that they have, they're willing to work with each other. And we've heard the former leader of Hezbollah in Lebanon speaking about them, Hezbollah sending fighters and advisors to support the Houthis in the fight. We've had the current leader of Hezbollah commemorating some of their dead ones, and calling the number of times they have been deployed to Yemen specifically. So it's something that started as small, but then as years were going, the links with Iran started to strengthen and develop. Very quickly on their link with Iran, people always think it from the lens of proxy. The Houthis think it is a valuable relationship because it gives them that regional presence, that they are not just an inward-looking group, but they have regional allies.
Thank you. Now we got another question about the Houthis from Fares al-Makhlafi. Fares, are you here? If not, it's in the chat. And
Yes, I'm here.
hi, Fares. Please
Hi.
do ask the question. Hi.
So, regarding you spoke. First of all, thank you for this talk. It's very informative, and it's actually you're bringing new insights that I myself have not been aware of. So, you spoke earlier about the Houthis can be persuaded to join the presidential council via financial incentives. However, the history of Houthis sitting together with the previous president, different parties in Yemen, have revealed that they always have increasing demands, and they have never agreed. Like, we remember that in Yemen, they first agreed to change the political system into a federal system where the country can be divided into several regions, can be ruled federally instead of centrally through the capital. But however, the Houthis have sabotaged this initiative, and whenever there is an initiative to make reforms, every time it is sabotaged. So I don't believe that mere financial incentives can be enough for them to join and share governance with the presidential council when they are the prime enemy before like Israel or Saudi Arabia. And also because you said it's a theological, they believe that they are the ones who are worthy of governance, considering that they're descendants of the Prophet. So what could be other ideas, or how can they be persuaded so at least things and reforms can happen in Yemen?
Thank you for us for pointing this out.
Thank you.
Because I think it's important to clarify. So saying the idea that in 2022, at least in Saudi Arabia, within a certain groups, was that they would like to persuade them to join the presidential council. It's not an idea that I personally share, but that was the push back then. They finally got a ceasefire agreement that is mainly holding itself between the main parties inside Yemen, and then they're trying then to move from that to having a framework for all groups to join a unity government. Now that was in 2022. That's the thinking back. Then. Now, if you ask me, I think you did point out on something very important that I missed. The Houthis, as you said rightfully, they believe in a divine right to rule, the rights of especially the Houthi family to rule, because they believe they are the descendants of Prophet Muhammad. And with that, the form of governance is very complex inside the northern territories, especially in the areas that they control, because it depends on class. It's a socio-class system that Yemen kind of tried to get rid of back in the 1960s. What I think should be done, I think the Yemeni government should try to get its act together inside Aden, and then there needs to be a push for all political parties to operate normally within Yemen, inside Yemen. And then from there, you can reach more of a national consensus amongst Yemenis of how do they move forward within the political parties, and then they can formulate that or negotiate that with the Houthis. But the second thing, they need to unify their forces. One of the things that the Houthis have benefited is a fractured front. They're fighting. The UAE funding one group, the Saudi Arabia for funding an opposing group, and that came at the disadvantage of the Yemeni government and its ability to basically settle on the ground. But yeah, I agree with you on terms of the intake. The whole crisis started really because the Houthis blocked the elections from taking place normally in 2015, and then blocked, as you rightfully mentioned, the new constitution, the referendum on the new constitution, which stated that Yemen will move to a federal system. And that's basically because they realize outside certain territories they have little support. Once you go out of the deep north of Yemen, there is little support to the Houthis. It is easier for them to control if they are in charge of, if they're essentially a central government that they run the whole state.
If I may add something, I have like an idea that I just thought of recently. Since the Houthis are ruling just the northern part of Yemen, and you said that their support is declining as you go deeper into the north. However, in the capital,
if you start leaving the north,
yeah.
So
Yeah,
central
yeah.
Yemen, eastern part of Yemen, yeah. South Yemen,
yes.
yeah.
However, in the capital, they pretty much have a consolidated position of power, and they have also support. However, what we see recently is that this support is declining due to economic decline, also the rising poverty amongst people. They have not been paying salaries for government workers for the past 10 years. No salaries; they just work for free, and also, what I think that could possibly happen is that it has to be triggered from the south, the southern part of Yemen. How? Because the south is also tainted by corruption. It's high corruption. It's not even working in the south. Like even the citizens who live in the south say that the situation in the north is even better. It's even better in the north. But what if economic reforms and political stability actually happen in the south, that the economic situation is much better in the south and could be very attractive for northern residents to move into the south, and to see the discrepancy between economic situation between north and south, that could put real pressure on the Houthis and could also lead to their support to decline sharply.
I agree. The governance issue is a real issue in Yemen, and it's always been. But a more stable South Yemen, that is basically, you need to have a good example that you're selling to the rest of the country. That pockets of, I would say, call it pockets of hope, can be reflected in other parts of Yemen.
Right. We've got a question from Gillian Dare. Great to see you, Gillian.
Thank you. Well, actually, my question's in the text. So, I'm seeing a lot of similarities or parallels with the situation in Iraq, which is what I deal with quite a lot. Yemen was a plural society, as you say, and so was Iraq. But although theoretically other parties and groups and communities are allowed to exist, in reality, the restrictions on them, both by government but also by neighbors, makes that almost impossible. Is that what's happening in Yemen? And if so, is there any real democracy possible, the sort of political dialogue that you're talking about? Sure.
So I'll try now to explain it with more clarity. So it started in Sana'a when the Houthis blocked political parties, media channels, freedom of just a normal press from operating in the capital. Now, what happened after the government announced Aden in South Yemen as an interim capital? Normally, political parties should start operating in South Yemen. Now, what happened is that the United Arab Emirates funded a group that became to be known as the Southern Transitional Council. And what they did is something similar. So they banned all political parties from operating. And then they started to conducting similar serious human rights abuses that we saw were happening that were happening by the Houthis in terms of the forced disappearances, unofficial detention centers, arbitrary detentions, kidnapping and abductions of journalists, and so on. So civil society were suppressed, and that basically didn't allow for basically a good model of governance, a good political structure to start operating normally in South Yemen. There have been then rounds of attempts to basically reconcile with this new entity that is funded by the United Arab Emirates, but they continued to clash with the Yemeni government. So you'd have rounds of conflict happening between. Now, put the Houthis to one side. I'm talking about within the territories that are supposed to be controlled by the Yemeni government. In my opinion, I think the Saudis should have early on in the conflict clearly put clear terms on the UAE, either to work with one vision, basically join their vision to how they see the future of Yemen, or ask them to leave. Those competing fragments and structures started to fight with each other, and basically until now we're talking about Parliament are not able to. They met 3 or 4 times but they met once in 2022 when they were forming the Presidential Council. But it's not a normal form of political a political framework, and again, Yemen can only be stable if we have normal political parties starting to operate normally and starting to providing alternatives, answers, questions, and being scrutinized by the public inside Yemen. Anytime we have envoys and diplomats trying to meet with political parties, they can only meet them outside. We need to start encouraging them that they need to go and operate inside Yemen, and we have to basically pressure all entities that are blocking the offices, that have shut down their offices. Let them have their conferences, their meetings, as political parties to happen inside Yemen.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I wonder, in the last few minutes that we have with you, if you could give us a little bit of a sense of your understanding of the humanitarian situation facing Yemenis right now. It's obviously something of huge concern, and there's different levels to that. But how do you see that, and what are the priorities?
So, first of all, I would start with the general income of Yemen. So Yemen, for the 90s and then became more reliant also in the 2000s, became very reliant on oil and gas. That started to drop, and it was steadily dropping every year. But then with the conflict happening in 2014 and then and 2015, that did damage Yemen's ability to even start, exploring new oil sites or encouraging, oil companies, gas companies operating normally inside Yemen. Means Yemen's reliance on its budget on oil and gas is becoming a serious challenge. Then you have other sources of income relying on some taxes, customs, and so on. That's still very much limited. And then you have the institutional capacity with the conflict. The ability of institutions to deliver services, electricity, water, education, and all kinds of services were being challenged. There have been humanitarian pledges happening through the year. In 1 year, at its peak, it reached 3.5 billion, and I'm not sure if it was 2018 or 2019. But the reliance on humanitarian aid is not a sustainable solution. It is time for, in my opinion, the focus on institutions to starting performing and delivering services in Yemen. No matter how much you start pouring humanitarian aid, it won't be enough facing the many challenges that Yemen currently are facing. But yeah, we're facing a really dire humanitarian situation. Again, and to explain it so people understand, currently the issue in Yemen is not just it's not simply that there isn't food. People cannot purchase that food. They cannot have access. The Yemeni currency's value has dropped significantly, which means even the people who are receiving some salary, it's not enough for them to get their families survive through the month. So we need to think about that side of thing, what Firas mentioned, the reforms, economical reforms, and trying to any challenges facing corruption and so on. So the Yemenis can be able to buy their own first of all buy their own food, but also then the institutions are able to deliver health services, education services, and others. I think the capacity of the international organizations has reached its limit, and now it's under even more pressure with Trump coming to office, and he did cut the US aid, which was the main contributor to UN programs, including UN programs in Yemen. So, in my opinion, I think it's reaching its limits in terms of what they can deliver in terms of UN agencies. The focus then should be, how can we encourage first of all the private sector who have left Yemen to return, and then how to revive the other revenue sectors. So the the Yemeni government can be able to finance itself, especially on the service delivery fronts.
Thank you very much for that, and I think that brings us to the end of this evening's briefing. But you've been fantastic, very clear and lucid, and I think given everybody a really good sense of where we are with Yemen, the challenges and the like. And I think you made some really important points about the way in which politics needs to be practiced.
Yeah.
And
I want to finish with just one thought. Usually in countries that are going through a protracted civil war like Yemen, I need just people to understand that this is not things always change. Every 1-2 years, there's something that is happening, something happening on a regional level that is changing, and with that, new opportunities arises. When finally on the regional front, basically, like for example, what happened in December and January, Saudi Arabia deciding to step up its presence in Yemen. With that comes opportunity, because then finally you can have some form of stability in some parts of Yemen. When changes happen, I think it is important to then capitalize on that opportunity and trying to find, saying, this is a new opportunity. Let's try to encourage it. And this will always happen. So a protracted conflict is never a steady thing. It will always change. Things change, and with that, new opportunities will come.
I think that's an excellent point, and it's certainly something that's borne out in other conflicts, including, for example, in Syria, for example. Yes. Obviously, has had challenging years as well. So there are opportunities hopefully around the corner. But a huge thank you to you, Baraa, for that. That was absolutely wonderful. We really appreciate that. Thank you for everybody for attending tonight. And for those who haven't joined Caabu, I hope you do become members. We'll be organizing other events, of course. And in the meantime, just to wish you a very happy summer, but also take care in this sweltering heat of the UK right now. For those of you who are